Chapter 1. A Soldier's Death. The first thing you would have seen if you had been there was a pair of silver eyes the size of a child's fist, pressed flat against black granite. In them, small and bright and upside down, the cathedral hull of a guild airship was burning. 16 soldiers hung on cables against the fire. Crossbows swept the cloud line in slow arcs. None of the arcs found what they were looking for, because what they were looking for was 3 body lengths above their heads, breathing shallow and not moving. Its crest rank. It has to be visible. Find it. I knew that voice. I had known it for a long time by then. It came down through the wind, sharp and unbothered, the same cadence he used on parade, the same cadence he had used the night he killed me. A soldier passed beneath the ledge on his cable, 3 feet under my belly, close enough that I could count the rivets on the crown of his helmet. His scanner tone stayed flat while he drifted past, and he never once looked up, because up is where the sky is, and men who work for a living learn early to watch the ground. I moved once, not toward him, toward a buckle 2 meters to his left, where a support cable ran up to the platform Sork was standing on, 1 claw, 1 angle. The cable parted with the small, clean sound a good rope makes when it finally decides. Sork did not shout. He was too proud for that. The platform tilted, and he went off the edge of it the way a coin goes off the edge of a table, and by the time the men on the other cables understood what had happened, I was already gone. They screamed into empty sky for a long time after that. That was later. That was after I had learned what quiet costs, and what it buys, and which of the two matters more. Before any of it, there was a bolt in my back and 600 feet of open air, and I was still a man. My name was Edran Wull, Corporal, 3rd Skyline, 4 years on the deck, and 1 more promised before the winter rotation. I was a scout, which meant I wrote reports nobody read, a thing a scout learns first and never quite forgets. The ledger was in a leather sleeve under my coat, against my ribs. 40-odd pages in the hand of a supply clerk named Olin, who had died some months earlier of a fever he had not caught in any barracks I knew of. The pages listed dates, amounts, and the name of a baron on the western marches. They also listed a series of small course corrections Commander Sork's predecessor had approved on the forward line, corrections that moved a patrol 2 ridges east of where the raiders were. On afternoons when the raiders came, 12 men had died on those afternoons. I had counted the afternoons, counted the men, made a copy, and that afternoon I was walking the copy to the command post, in daylight, in front of 80 witnesses, so that whatever happened next happened on paper. It was a good plan for a scout. Sork was on the observation gallery above me. I did not look up. He knew what I had. That was the mistake I had made on purpose. I was on the 4th plank from the edge when the bolt hit me. It came from my left flank. Not from the parapet, not from any position an enemy could have reached. From the deck itself, from a man in my own colors, standing in a firing crouch 6 meters off my shoulder. I turned my head enough to see him. His name was Halric. He had eaten breakfast at my table that morning. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the observation gallery, waiting to be told he had done well. The bolt had gone in low on the left, under the short rib. Perhaps 30 seconds before the lung filled. Less than that before my legs stopped agreeing with me. I took 2 more steps, because 2 more steps were what a corporal of the 3rd Skyline took when he was hit, and on the 3rd the deck was no longer under my foot. A scout counts. It is what a scout does, 600 feet to the cloud shelf, give or take the wind, and terminal in about 11 seconds if I stayed flat. I stayed flat. There was no reason not to. The cloud came up gray and cold and full of small hard water. I passed through it at the count of 7, and there was nothing under it for another 4 counts, and then there was... I thought about the ledger, which was still against my ribs, and about who would find it, and about the answer to that question, which was no one. I thought about the wind, because thinking about the wind was what my hands had been trained to do, and my hands were the last part of me still working. At the count of 10 I closed my eyes, because a scout who dies with his eyes open looks surprised, and I did not want to look surprised. At the count of 11 the sky stopped. I woke on stone. The stone was under too much of me, and too close to my eyes, and my eyes were wrong in a way I could not name. They saw the veins in the lichen a hand's breadth from my face, and, at the same time and without turning, the shape of the ledge behind me and the drop past its lip. Somewhere off in the fog a drip of water fell in a slow rhythm, and under it the fog itself moved in braided currents, the way a river moves at night. I tried to stand, and my legs did not know what standing was. They knew 4 other things instead. I stayed where I was. A window opened in front of me. Not a window in any wall, a window in the air, silver-edged, small, and it wrote itself in a voice that was inside my head and not in it. Species, Duskwing Sliver, rank, hatch. I read the lines twice. I did not panic. I have never been good at panic. I lay very still on the wet stone and read them a third time, and I thought in the flat interior voice a scout uses when the count has already begun that whatever a Duskwing Sliver was, it was not a corporal of the third skyline. Then I heard, in the fog off to my right, something shift its weight. It had noticed I moved. Chapter 2. 9 Days of Watching. If the men who trained you to protect the kingdom are the ones who killed you, what exactly do you owe the kingdom now? I was a scout. I did not panic. That was the discipline, and the discipline was the only thing left of the man who had fallen, so I kept it the way a drowning sailor keeps a knife. I lay flat under the lichen and counted the barb skink's steps, 22 on the outbound arc, a pause, 22 back. It had been going 22 and 22 for the last 3 passes, and I had been under the shelf for 6 hours, and I did not move. Days 1 through 3 I did not attempt to eat. I did not know what this body ate. I watched the skink take a gnat off a stem, then watched it ignore a red-veined moth and drink from a bead of condensation on granite, and I filed the angle of its neck against each. On day 3 I found a colony of pale grubs under a slab of shale and put one in my mouth and did not die. So I ate 4 more and filed that. Day 4 the wind shifted. I learned the fog shelf had lanes, corridors where the fog held and corridors where it did not, and I learned which lanes carried scent uphill to the ridge and which spilled it into the deep air below. I moved along the spillover lanes only. If a scent went off the edge of the island, it went to nothing, and nothing was where I wanted to live. Day 5 I found the barb skink's nest. Not a nest, a scrape. 2 eggs the color of wet slate, and the skink returned to them at intervals I began to measure. The intervals were the shape of my whole life now. 40 seconds after a barb skink struck at anything, a gnat, a stem, air, it took that long before it could strike again. Its jaw locked, its tongue reset. Long enough to matter if you were counting, gone in a breath if you were not. I began to count. Day 6 a memory arrived I had not asked for. A field surgeon on the third sky line, name of Kessel, drunk one night, lecturing us on the spine junctions of the marsh lizards the border patrols brought back. He drew on a plank with a piece of charcoal. Behind the skull, he said, 2 vertebrae down on a reptile that size. You do not go for the throat, you go for the seam between the plates where the cord runs shallow. He drew a small X on the plank and tapped it and said, there, boys, is where God put the off switch. Kessel had been the second man Sork's predecessor got killed. I had liked him. I lay under the lichen and imagined the X on the barb skink's neck and matched it to the animal I was watching. 2 plates down from the skull, a shallow seam where the scales thinned. I looked at my own front claws, and I looked at the seam, and I did the arithmetic without writing it down. Day 7 I moved closer to the patrol arc and lay under a different shelf and counted again. The skink's eyes were placed for lateral vision. Directly behind the skull was blind for a hand's breadth of arc. I measured the arc by watching it fail to notice a beetle crawl there for the length of a slow breath. Day 8 I did nothing but rehearse. I lay under the shelf and moved the muscles of this body through the strike I would make, and did not make it. I did the strike until the shape of it lived in the tendons and not in the thinking part. On day 9 the wind was correct, the light was correct, and the skink came around on its outbound arc and paused to take a gnat off a stem. And I counted 1 against the 40-second window as its jaw locked on the gnat. I moved. The barb skink went down without a sound. Its tail moved for another 2 seconds, and then it did not. I stayed on top of it with my claws in the seam until I was sure. Then I stepped off. I lay next to the dead skink and read the 2 lines as a question the system was asking to see if I understood what I already was. Sork had chosen Loud. Sork had a bribe from a baron, 12 dead men on a forward line, and a career built on being visible to the people who mattered. Loud had worked for him, right up to the bolt he put in my back. I did not test it against the wind. The wind was not the test. The wind did not have eyes. I waited. I had spent 9 days learning to wait, and the 10th was the same as the 9th. The barb skink lay where it had fallen. Its blood cooled. The fog moved through the lane and did not carry my scent because there was no scent to carry. The pressure changed at 40 meters, and I did not turn my head. I read the change through the whiskered edges of the ribs I did not fully own yet, a downdraft wide, a wingspan of 2.5 meters cutting the fog above me on a hunting arc. Crestfang, talon rank, the apex on this island above the skinks and below the ridgehawks, and I was a hatchling the size of 2 fingers curled together, lying next to a fresh kill in open air. I did not move. The hawk came down the lane in a long, soundless glide. Its shadow crossed the granite and passed over me. I felt the pressure of the wing beat on the scales along my spine and the eddy of warm air off its belly. It banked close above my head, close enough that a molted feather would have brushed me, and its head turned across the ground, and its eyes read the granite and the lichen and the dead barbed skink, and did not read me. It took the skink in one motion and lifted, and the weight of the kill pulled a small cry from its throat, and it climbed the lane and was gone. The hawk's shadow passed over me and continued on, and I lay under the shelf with my heart running at a rate I could not slow and understood, cold and clear. That quiet was a weapon I had not yet learned to price. Chapter 3. The Ridgeline. I left the fog shelf on the second thermal after sunrise, low and slow, keeping the belly of my new body against the stone until the last possible fraction of a wing beat. The island receded under me in the way a page turns. I did not look back at it. I had learned nothing on it that would keep me alive on what came next, except how to be quiet, and I intended to be very quiet for a long time. The ridgeline was a country. That was the first correction I made to my thinking. It was 30 kilometers of vertical basalt cut into ledges and cirques and roost hollows and wind-scoured saddles, and every meter of it was owned by something with teeth. I had spent 9 days learning to hunt one lizard on a shelf of moss. I was about to spend 3 weeks learning to walk through a city whose citizens ate each other for reasons of temperament. I did not enter it. That was the second correction. I found a lichen crack on the eastern approach, 200 meters below the lowest active roost, and I lived in it. Day 1. I catalogued 3 species by call alone. Crestfang, near certain by the descending keck. Something larger that keened at intervals of about 40 minutes and did not answer any other bird. A third voice I could not place, sharp and short, that came only after a kill, scavenger I guessed. I did not go and look. I did not need to look to log a call. By the third morning I had the first map built inside my skull, laid over the terrain like a grid. I fixed reference points along the black spine and gave each a soldier's designation because a soldier's designation was the only kind I still trusted. Point Ash, Point Whitewind, Point Iron, Point Third Bell for the hollow the wind rang at that saddle, Point Long Shadow, Point Scarp. Between them ran the arcs of every predator I could hear, and the arcs told me things the birds did not know they were telling. I identified the old one on the 5th day. He was the biggest signal in the sky, and the way the smaller birds bent their flight around him told me he had held this stretch of ridge long enough to be furniture. Old Crestfang wingspan I estimated at 2.5 meters against the shadow he threw. Patrol arc a long, lazy figure crossed twice by a straight vector down the spine to a specific roost. Feeding window in the middle third of the morning and again at dusk. He was economical. He was also, I realized the following day, half blind on the left. His head cant when he banked was 3 degrees off a true bird's, and he over-rotated to compensate. Something had taken the eye, probably a decade back. He had lived through it. I named him Austin Drave, after a scout sergeant I had served under in my first year on the line, who was also economical and who was also, in his particular way, half blind. Drave did not know I existed. That was the point. A second Crestfang came into the log on the 8th day, smaller, younger, his arcs were wrong. He was cutting into the eastern approach, my eastern approach. The corridor I had spent days convincing myself I could use to move north when the time came, and he was cutting into it because he was testing Drave. I watched him do it 3 mornings in a row. He would enter the corridor at Point Whitewind, hold the line for 100 meters, and break off before the arc where Drave would have to see him and answer. He was measuring the old bird. He was measuring how many mornings before Drave would fail to answer at all. I understood him. I had known men like him, ambitious men who could count. The problem was that when he committed, and he was going to commit within the week on the arithmetic, he was going to bring a fight through my corridor. 2 Crestfangs tearing at each other over Point Whitewind would draw every scavenger in the ridge, and the scavengers would draw the thing that keened at 40-minute intervals. And I would be moving through the middle of it with a body the size of a housecat, and no cover except a doctrine. I sat with that for a day, Moving against the young one meant showing my hand, and I had spent 9 days learning not to show my hand. The alternative was to give up the corridor and take a longer route across a face I had not mapped, which meant 3 weeks of new work and a higher probability that something on the new face would eat me before I finished the map. The arithmetic was clear. I killed the young one on the 11th day. I set up under a lichen shelf at Point Whitewind, and I waited for his second morning pass. He came in on his standard vector, low and confident, holding the line, and he broke off at the exact meter I had marked him breaking off on 3 previous mornings. Consistency was his mistake. He banked left over a granite lip I had spent 2 days measuring, and he passed within 4 meters of the shelf I was under, and I moved once. Null trace was already active. He did not see me leave the shelf. He did not see me on his blind flank. I hit the spine junction the anatomist in my memory had told me about, at the base of the skull where the second cervical met the atlas, and he was dead before he understood he had been touched. He fell 3 meters and lodged in a talus crack, wings folded, no visible wound from any angle a bird could take. I did not eat him. I did not scent mark the kill, and I did not linger. I moved off the ridge 200 meters back to my lichen crack, and I lay in it and did not move for the rest of the morning. The system window opened somewhere behind my eyes, calm and machine-voiced. Concealment score, that was new. I read the line twice, then let it sit. Whoever kept it, I would find out eventually, or I would not. Drave found the body at his mid-morning pass. I heard the descending keck shift by a halftone as he crossed Point Whitewind, and then he circled, 3 tight turns over the talus, and then he was silent for a long time. I could see him from my crack if I tilted one eye. He was reading the kill the way I had read patrol arcs, working out what had happened. He was not going to work it out, because there was nothing on the body to work out. No scavenger sign, no talon print, no scent that belonged to any bird he had catalogued in 10 years of holding the ridge. What he was going to conclude was that something had removed a rival from his air and had left the rival where he would find him. The next dawn, Drave's patrol arc adjusted. It was a small adjustment. His long, lazy figure crossed the eastern approach twice instead of skirting it, and his straight vector down the spine now clipped my corridor by 15 meters at Point Iron. He was including it. He was flying it as if it belonged to him, and as if he had reason to believe it was quieter than it had been the week before. I thought about the ledger. What I had done was very simple, and giving it a name did not make it any simpler. I had used attribute killing. I had made an offering to a king I would never meet and would never petition, and the king had rewarded me by extending his protection over ground I intended to walk. His arc was now my ceiling. Any scavenger that entered my corridor would see Drave first. Any smaller predator that tested the corridor would break off the way the young one had broken off. Except now, the young one was not there to test it at all, and Drave's presence over Point Iron would keep the next young one honest for at least a season. I had used the hierarchy above me as cover. I had used an enemy's authority without his knowledge and without his permission as a wall between me and the rest of the sky. 3 days later I moved. I took the corridor at first light, null trace up, staying inside Drave's arc without ever crossing his direct sight line. I made 40 meters of vertical in a morning, which for a body my size was a considerable distance. And I found a ledge under an overhang of black basalt at a height I had not been able to reach from the fog shelf. I slept on it. I had not slept in a place that high in either of my lives. I woke to a pressure change. I did not open my eyes. Opening my eyes was a motion, and motion was a signature. I read the wind instead. Something large was above me on a slow bank, and the slow bank was coming closer. And the wing beat was 2.5 meters of span, moving with the small over-rotation of a bird, half blind on the left. Drave passed over the ledge at a height of maybe 4 meters. I felt the pressure of his wing beat against the fur along my spine, a soft downward push, and then the release, and then the push again, 3 cycles as he crossed. He held his line. He did not strike. He banked away over the drop and continued on his patrol arc, and the wind he left behind him smelled of salt and old feathers and something faintly copper that I understood after a moment was blood from a rat he had eaten at dusk. He had known I was there. He had come close enough to be certain of it. He had banked away. I lay on the ledge and did not permit myself to move for a long time after his shadow passed. I was not afraid of him anymore, and I made myself hold the difference between that and safety clearly in the front of my mind, because losing it was the kind of mistake that killed scouts. I turned my head once and looked south along the cloud line, back the way I had come. 6 shapes had entered the cloud from the horizon. They were holding formation. They were not birds. Chapter 4. 6 ships against the cloud. Drave went the way old hawks go when they have decided something is coming. His wing angled once against the cloud, and then the cloud closed, and he was somewhere I could not see. I stayed where I was. I watched the horizon behind him. 6 shapes were arranging themselves along the cloud line at a spacing I recognized before I understood I recognized it. It was the spacing the 3rd Sky Line had used for artillery approach in the Marches campaign. 2 lead vessels, 3 at the shoulder, 1 at the rear, siege spacing. They had not come to catch anything. They had come to grind an island flat and take home whatever survived the grinding. I counted the running lights along the cloud line, culling guild colors. The lead ship was called the Marrowbite. I had watched her keel be laid at the Velen yards when I was 17, and thought the word for what I felt looking at her was pride. She was carrying 240 souls today by the size of her underdeck, and a full ballista rank along her starboard, and a gas dispersal frame on her spine that had not existed the last time I saw her. Somebody had done well out of the war. I put myself flat against the stone and let Null Trace settle across me the way a good cloak settles across a shoulder. Then I waited to hear the voice I already knew was going to come. Ground the shoulder ships. Ballista cruise to standing. I want the fog shelf under scanner in 6 minutes, or I want to know why. There it was. The same cadence he had used to order the bolt into my back. Not louder, not different, not marked by any weight of what he had done between then and now. He was reading from the same page he always read from. I did not move. I had not expected to feel anything, and I did not feel anything, and I noted the not feeling the way a scout notes the absence of tracks, as data, as a thing to be uneasy about later. Sork came to the Marrowbite's bow rail and put a gloved hand on it and looked down at the fog shelf the way a landlord looks at a field he has decided to burn. He was heavier than I remembered. The heaviness sat on him well. Men who profit from their work often carry the profit in the shoulders first. Cartographer, give me the anomaly board. A woman crossed the deck. I saw her from 30 meters off in dead air, holding to a granite shelf with claws I was still learning the strength of. And I catalogued her the way I catalogued everything now, by what was useful about her. Anomaly board is current as of this morning's sweep. Commander, 3 items. The one that will matter to you is the 3rd. Give me the one that is going to slow me down. A movement track along the southern fog shelf that does not fit any recorded species profile. I have plotted it against every known predator on the guild registry for this altitude. It matches none of them. I held very still. I had been careful. I had thought I had been careful. I ran back through the past 9 days in my head at the speed a scout runs a patrol route, and I could not find where I had been careless enough to leave a track a cartographer could plot from a deck. And then I understood cold and clear that I had not left a track. She had inferred one. She had found the absences and drawn a line through them. She was reading the shape of the hole I made in the island's ordinary traffic. The pattern is inconsistent with any hunter I can name, but it is consistent with a hunter. The corridor is being used. Something is moving through it deliberately. I would like the ballista rank held on the southern approach until I have another day of observation. You would like the ballista rank held? Yes. On the strength of a movement track you cannot attribute to a species. On the strength of a movement track that has structure. Structure is what I flag. Structure is what you pay me for. There was a small silence on the deck. 3 of the men at the shoulder rail found other places to look. I had heard that silence before. It was the silence a man makes when he is deciding whether the person in front of him is going to be useful to him in the next 6 months, or whether he is going to have them reassigned to a coastal survey post where they will not be a problem. Colin, the guild does not pay to have a fog shelf mapped. The guild pays to have it cleared. If there is a hunter in your corridor, my ballista rank is going to introduce itself to the hunter, and then your corridor is going to be quiet. And then you are going to draw a very clean chart of a quiet island and I'm going to sign it. Are we understanding each other? I understand what you are saying, Commander. That is not what I asked. I know. Ballista rank stands. Ground the shoulder ships. 6 minutes. He turned away from her the way a man turns away from a settled thing. She stood at the rail a moment longer, and I watched her write in the log I could see at her hip. She did not write fast. She did not write angrily. She wrote the way people write when they know a page is going to be read later by someone who is not in the room. She was building a record. She was building it patiently, and she was building it in front of a commander who had just told her the record was not going to matter. I filed her against the deck the way I filed the ballista rank and the gas dispersal frame and the signal cadence. A resource, a vector. A cartographer who could infer a hunter from an absence and was willing to sign her name to the inference in a book her commander would not read. She stayed at the rail while the crew ate. She stayed at the rail while the running lights came on. She had a chart open in her lap by the time the first real dark came in from the north, and she was drawing on it. I could see the small movement of her right hand, wrist steady, elbow tucked against her ribs the way a cartographer keeps a line true on a moving deck. I did not need to see the chart to know what was on it. She was drawing my corridor from the absences, more accurately than the guild registry would have drawn it from a full week of scanner sweeps, because she was drawing it from the shape of what was not there, and what was not there was me. Her lantern was small, and the wind was picking up, and she cupped a hand around the flame each time it guttered. She was not going to sleep tonight. I watched her cup the flame, and I watched her wrist move over the chart. And something moved through the small body I now occupied, the flat professional respect a scout gives another scout across an enemy line. For someone doing the work correctly under conditions that did not reward it. I told myself that was what it was. The wind shifted, her lantern guttered and held. She lifted her head and looked out along the granite spine of the ridge, and for a moment her eyes crossed the shelf I was pressed against. And Null Trace did what Null Trace does, and her gaze passed over me and continued on. She did not see me. She was not going to see me. She was going to keep drawing the shape of me on her chart in careful ink, and her commander was going to overrule her. And I was going to have to decide what a man who was no longer a man owed to a woman who was doing his old job better than he had ever done it. I moved 2 ledges east, into deeper cloud out of the arc of the lantern light. Silently, patiently, without permitting myself to look back. The Marrowbite's running lights arranged behind me in the dark. The signal horn called the shoulder ships to their standing altitudes. Somewhere below me a ballista crew loaded its first quarrel of the night and did not fire it, because there was nothing yet in their scanner arc to fire at. There was going to be soon. And when it came, the cartographer at the rail was going to be the one who saw it first, and the commander at the bow was going to be the one who did not listen. And I was going to be the third thing in that room, the one they were talking about, the one neither of them yet knew by name. I put the shelf behind me and went east along the ridge into the dark. Chapter 5, The Clear Way. The purge had been working downward since first light, and I could hear it, not the teeth of the saw, but the pause between them. The rhythm of men who had done this work before and expected to do it again tomorrow. 3 ledges under me a barbed skink went quiet mid-strike, and stayed quiet. Gas first, then a sweep, then a man with a torch to make sure nothing was pretending. I had been on the outcrop for a while, and I had watched the scanner for most of it. It swept a 40-degree cone at what I estimated as 1 arc every 6 seconds, and it moved on a mounted track. Whoever was running it was tired or bored or both. The arc was consistent. That was the only good news I had. The bad news filled the rest of the frame. Between me and the Crown Rock spires there was nothing, no thermal seam I could ride, no cloud pillar tall enough to hide inside for more than a heartbeat. A kilometer of open air the color of wet iron, and 1 instrument on the deck of 1 airship that could see me by the heat of my own blood. I had 2 ways of not being seen. Null Trace, the trait I had chosen on the 9th day, kept me off the eye of anything that hunted by sight or by the low, bright ping of a living body against stone. It did nothing for heat. For heat, I had void breath, a trick the Duskwing form ran on its own, a slowing of the metabolism. The surface temperature of the body pulled down toward the temperature of the air. Alone it would drop me maybe 4 degrees, enough to blur a lazy operator, but not enough for a mount. Layered on top of Null Trace, it would be enough. I had already tested the layering under the lichen shelf 2 nights back. The system had put up a window I did not like the color of. Sense cascade. The system had not explained itself and had not needed to. I had been a scout long enough to understand a warning by the shape of the words. Something in this body could only be dialed down so far before the dial came off in your hand. 18 seconds. The clearway was a kilometer wide. In this body, on a good wind, I could cover roughly 60 meters a second in a straight glide, which gave me 17 seconds if I did not have to correct once. I was going to have to correct. There was a scanner cone to slide around, and the wind under the clearway ran in 3 layers that did not agree with each other, and I did not know this body's ceiling under load. I did not know a great deal about this body. That was the pattern of the last 5 weeks, a thing learned, a thing used, the next thing waiting. I waited for the scanner to complete a full arc, and I counted, and on the count of 4 I dropped off the outcrop. Void breath came on the way a hand goes numb, a settling, not a switch. The heat behind my ribs dropped away from my skin. Null trace stacked on top of it, and the world around me went a shade thinner, the way sound goes thin when you cup your hands over your ears. I began counting seconds against the scanner's arc. The first pass of the cone crossed east of me and kept going. I banked for a shelf of colder air I had marked earlier, a seam I had watched a gull ride 2 days back. The seam took me. I stopped beating the membranes and let it carry. The system window flickered at the edge of my sight without unfolding, a warning that had not yet decided to be a warning. I did not look at it. I counted. The spires had begun to grow from a black line into something with faces on it when the scanner's cone came back for its return arc, and I read it wrong by half a second, and I had to tuck a wing to fall 2 meters below the edge of it. That cost me. Falling under load is not free. The metabolism kicked to hold the glide, and the surface temperature came up half a degree in my chest before void breath dragged it back down. I was going to be short. There was one more thermal layer between me and the spires, and it ran the opposite direction. If I dropped into it clean, I would lose 4 seconds correcting. If I skipped over the top of it, I would lose altitude I did not have to spare. I chose the drop. I had been trained to choose the correction I could measure over the one I could not. I dropped through the seam. The correction cost me 11 meters of altitude. I came out under the seam clean, wings full, the spires close enough now that I could count the striations in the granite of the nearest face. It went the way a candle goes. The wind stopped. Not the wind, the sound of the wind and the pressure of it against the membranes, and the cold of it on the skin behind my eyes. The spires went dark. The scanner cone went dark. The heat of my own body, which I had been holding down by the throat, went dark. Every referent the mind uses to know it has a body underneath it was simply gone, and what remained was the shape of a body around a mind that could no longer confirm the body was there. I did the only thing a scout who has lost his instruments does. I stopped moving. I did not thrash. I did not try to correct a glide I could no longer feel. I held the last configuration my wings had been in, and I trusted that the air I could not feel was still under them. I fell. I knew I was falling because the mind that had been a soldier knew what a fall felt like from the inside, and this body, small, silver, 5 weeks old to me, reported that inside in a language the soldier could still read. Not through the ears, not through the skin. Through the older part, the part that had ridden a horse down a slope in the dark and known by the horse's back which way the ground was. I counted. Not seconds. I could not measure seconds without a pulse to measure them against. I counted the shape of the fall. A body of my mass at the altitude I had crossed at, into air I had read on the way out. I had roughly 9 counts of fall before the second thermal layer would catch a wing that was open to it. If I could keep the wing open, if the layer had not shifted while I was blind. On what I judged was the 6th count, I felt the layer. I felt it in a body I did not fully own, a reflex the Duskwing had brought with it, a habit of shoulder and membrane the soldier had never learned and did not have to. The wings adjusted without my permission, and the layer caught, and what had been a fall became a glide, blind, on an angle a creature I had not been 6 weeks ago had chosen for me. The senses tore back the way a door slams. Sound came back first, and it came back too loud. Wind. The scream of a raptor 2 ridges east, my own membranes ratcheting under load. Then sight, and the spires were not where I had left them. They were above me, much closer, much higher, the granite face I had been meant to land on now looming past the top of my field. I had lost altitude I could not price. I was going to hit the cliff face low. I was going to hit it under an overhang I had marked on the way out as a stable ledge with no active predator signature. The overhang was moving. An 8-meter shape peeled off the granite the way a shadow peels off a wall, wings that had been folded flat against the rock unfolding at a speed the size of the thing should not have allowed. Its underside was the same gray as the stone it had been pressed against. Its head came around, unhurried, and its eye, larger than my body, found me in the air. Chapter 6. Volthide. The shadow came over me the way weather comes over a road, without hurry, without malice, without any interest at all in what was underneath it. I was flattened against a seam of black granite the width of my body, claws locked in the crack, and I watched the shape of the wing cross the stone above me and go on, 8 meters tip to tip. A single unbroken curve. The Volthide banked west and was gone into the cloud before the pressure of its passage had finished traveling down the cliff face to my ribs. I did not move for a long time after that. Movement was what the sky was watching for. Movement was what the sky ate. The Crown Rock spires had names that soldiers did not know, names older than masons, older than houses, given by wind and by wing, and remembered only by the things that could still fly. I had inherited them the way a man learns a country he cannot leave. I was 3 ledges into the spires, and I had not seen another creature of my own species since the Clearway. That was not an accident. This was Volthide country. Volthides did not tolerate other predators in the vertical plane, and other predators, having learned this, did not enter the vertical plane. I was in it because I had fallen into it, and because leaving it would put me back inside a thermal scanner's arc, so I stayed. I stayed, and I watched. I profiled the first mated pair by their shadow schedule. The male crossed the west face at 7th bell, and the female crossed the east face 40 minutes later. They did not overlap. They did not communicate. They shared a hunting country the way 2 soldiers share a watch, by the clock, without affection. In the 3rd week I had 6 of them, 2 pairs, 2 solitary males on the outer spires. I knew their hunting windows, their thermal preferences, their preferred strike angles. I knew that a Volthide did not stoop like a hawk. It glided and took the target off the face of the stone in a single passing sweep of talon and jaw, the wing never breaking its line. What I did not have was a way past them. The doctrine had a rule, and the rule was old already. I did not fight what I could go around, but there was no going around the Volthides. They owned the vertical band from the 3rd ledge to the 7th, and above the 7th the pinnacle wind began, and the pinnacle wind was a country I was not yet ready to enter. I had to move up through them or sit here until the guild sweep pushed high enough to find me, so I went looking for a window. I found it on the male's 4th pass across the west face. He took a rock lizard off a shelf, the talon coming down through the lizard's spine, the jaw closing on the head in the same motion, and I saw the wing hesitate, a 1/4 of a second, then a half. Then it folded, and he was gone into the updraft with his kill, but that hesitation, I had seen it, and I did not know what it was. I watched for another 8 days, and by the end of them I had it. After contact, after the talons closed on prey, the Volthide's wing locked open for 0.8 of a second before it could fold. Some old muscle memory built into the strike, some deep reflex of a species that had evolved to hit and glide, and that could not do both operations at once. For 0.8 of a second after every kill, an 8-meter predator could not close its wing. 0.8 of a second was a window. I began to plan the strike I would never be inside. I attacked its wing. The male came in on the schedule I had memorized, the same shelf, the same rock lizards, the same angle of approach, and I was already in position, 3 meters above the shelf. Wedged into a fissure narrow enough that no wing could reach me, he struck. The talons closed. The wing locked open in that 0.8 of a second, and I moved once, a single stroke of the claw across the tendon at the outboard joint. The specific tendon a dead soldier's anatomy training had taught me governed the fold. The claw went through. The tendon parted. I was back in the fissure before his eye had turned. The Volthide finished the strike. He did not know yet that anything had changed. He carried the lizard 3 wing beats out over the updraft, and then he tried to fold the wing to bank west, and the wing did not fold. I watched him from the fissure. He tried the fold a second time. The wing stayed open. He tried to compensate with the tail, and the tail could not carry 8 meters of wing on its own. He began to drift. The updraft carried him out past the west face, past the useful thermal band, past the last rock he could have caught with a working talon. He drifted the way a lantern drifts when a rope is cut. Steady, deliberate, downward, patient. I did not follow him down. 2 ledges below the Volthide country, on a ridge I had mapped and refused to enter, something waited that ate anything that came into its band on a bad angle. I had never seen it. I had only seen the bones it left. The Volthide passed into that band 12 minutes after I cut the tendon, and the bones were there the next dawn, picked clean and arranged by the current on a shelf I would never walk on. I was never in the killing frame. The system window opened on the fissure wall in front of me the way it always did, silver, terse, patient. I read it twice. Then the options came. The recommended form would have made me the thing I had just killed, bigger, louder, visible, a creature that owned a country by making other creatures see it. I looked at the word recommended and I understood, calm and clear, that the system recommended what most creatures took, because most creatures wanted to be seen. I chose the second form. I was choosing silent a second time with a full accounting in front of me, and that second choice was heavier than the first. I felt something shift in my chest, the mass coming off my shoulders and settling low in the ribs, the concealment index climbing without ceremony, the scales along my flank going from silver-white to a color the eye could not settle on. The system closed the window. I was Talon rank and I was less visible than I had been at Fledge. I stayed in the fissure for another hour. I was waiting to see if anything had noticed. Nothing had. The female came across the east face at her scheduled bell and passed my position without turning her head. The updraft carried the smell of the Volthide's blood south into the cloud, away from her, on a wind I had counted on. I had picked the fissure for that wind 3 weeks before. I was about to move when the system window opened again. It was not an evolution prompt. It was not a kill readout. I had never seen this line before. I read it once. I read it a second time. I did not move. The system had noticed. The system was writing me down. I had been reading the system for months as a mirror, a surface that told me what I had done, what I had earned, what I could take. I understood, sitting in that fissure with the second refusal still cooling in my chest, that the mirror had a face behind it. Something was reading me back. Something had a ledger of its own, and my name had just moved from one column to another. I did not know yet whether that ledger belonged to the sky or to the guild, or to a country older than either. I knew only that the window had closed a beat late, and that a beat late was information, and that information was what I ate now. I left the fissure at the 8th bell, moving up the west face on a wind I had counted. The Volthide country was open above me for the first time in 34 days. I did not celebrate the opening. I noted it, and I climbed, and I kept the second window in the back of my mind the way a scout keeps the count of an enemy's guns, quietly, precisely, and without ever setting it down. Chapter 7. The Filaments. I had been on the ledge since the middle watch, and I did not move when the sun cleared the eastern spur. I saw what I had come up here to see. For perhaps 4 seconds a spider's map lit across half a kilometer of open air, then vanished as the sun climbed 1 degree past the angle that caught it. They were called pinnacle drifters in the guild taxonomy, a soldier's manual I had read once in a barracks and had not thought I would need to remember: colonial, filament predators. Each thread finer than a hair and stronger than a sword cord, strung across the thermal channels the way fishermen string nets across a river mouth. And every strand alive in a way I had learned not to test. You did not fight a drifter colony. Null trace was noise to a body that hunted by contact. Every trick I had learned was a bell tied to my own neck up here. The crevasse cluster on spur 4 is a keel piece. It's holding 2 islands together. If the demolition team cuts it, the islands separate. If they separate, they drift. If they drift, they enter the clearway inside 6 months. The commander has approved the cluster. I know he has. That's why I'm telling you before I tell him. I did not see this happen. I heard about it later the way I heard about most guild business, from a signal flash off a lantern I had learned to read, and from a dead man's manual I had learned to remember correctly. But the shape of it I could guess even then on my ledge, watching the dawn walk sideways across 100 threads I could not afford to touch. A feather, released at the eastern lip of the seam, would drift west at a rate that told me the thermal's velocity, multiplied against the wind shear at the middle band, that gave me a channel width. Compared to yesterday's red at the same hour, that gave me a colony expansion rate, because a drifter colony breathed. It let out threads in the warm hours and drew them in during the cold. And if you did not know the difference between the dawn gap and the noon gap, you did not know anything the country needed you to know. The colony took the feather. It knew only that something small had touched a thread, and one strand pulled taut and did nothing else, because a feather was not worth waking a body for. I marked the position on the map I was keeping inside my own head. I had no other paper, and I added the strand to the others I had located since the dark. You have an objection. A structural one, sir. The cluster is load-bearing between spur 4 and the eastern shelf. Cutting it separates the islands. Separation puts them into the clearway drift by early spring. The cluster is scheduled. I understand it's scheduled. I'm asking you to reschedule. On what authority? On the authority of a cartographer telling her commander that his shipping lane is about to acquire 2 uncharted islands moving at 4 knots. Colin, I've read your projection, and the geologists, they do not agree. The geologist is measuring the rock. I'm measuring the drift. The cluster is scheduled. Return to your maps. I would come to know Mira Calland well enough, in the way one comes to know a person one has never spoken to guess what she did next. She sat down. She did not put the pen away. She wrote out the objection in full, the measurements, the projected drift, the interval, the 2 islands by name, and she signed it. And she filed it into the ship's structural record over the commander's overrule, knowing the record would not be read, and knowing that this was not the point. I shifted position for the first time that morning, not across the channel. I was not ready to cross the channel, and I would not be ready for days by the count I was keeping. I moved along the ledge, 3 meters, to a lower stone that let me watch the western end of the seam at the angle the noon light would find it. The guild had come to erase every predator on the Sky Islands. They had not thought to ask which predator was watching them do it. Chapter 8. The Sovereign Descends. I saw it before I understood what I was seeing, a shape against the stars wide enough to take a constellation out of the sky and put it back 3 heartbeats later, farther east than it belonged. I had been mapping thermal drift on the seam above my ledge, and I stopped mapping because a piece of the night had moved and the piece was too large. The old records in the 3rd skyline called it the Growlworm. The masons who cut the road up out of Velmere by the sea had cut its name into the topmost stone with the same tool they had cut their own, 60 years on these islands. Sovereign rank on any ledger that admitted the word. Officers used the name the way officers use the names of storms they have decided not to fly into. In the body I used to own, I had never expected to see it. I saw it now. It came down off its ridge in a long, slow slide of wing-beat and gravity, and the ridge above it was on fire. Gas dispersal. I recognized the sound the way a soldier recognizes his own regiment's drum. The guild had put a battery on the ridge shoulder and was pushing something down off its high ground with pressure and poison, and the something was coming down through my column of air. I did the arithmetic without wanting to. The Growlworm's cruising altitude by the old naval charts sat high above the spire's crown. It was already below that. From 3 separate pressure fields against my flank, I read its descent as steady and unhurried. My ledge sat well above the fog shelf. In under a quarter of an hour, a sovereign-rank predator would be at my elevation, and shortly after that at Ossendraves. The guild artillery started firing again, closer to my elevation this time, sweeping a lower band. That was the other arithmetic, the purge climbing, the sovereign falling, and the band of air I could occupy without dying contracting hour by hour, and now minute by minute, with me in the middle of it. I put my body flat against the stone and I counted. A cathedral came down through the cloud. That was the honest description. It had a head at one end shaped like a helm and a tail at the other shaped like a rudder, and between them was a length of body that I could not measure because I did not have a reference for it. Its wing beat carried a low subharmonic that ran up through the granite into my ribs. When it passed over my ledge, still on its slide, the pressure change lifted my scales a full millimeter off my skin and let them settle again, one by one, like a page turning. I understood in the way a scout understands a shift in a tree line, that I had never been in the presence of an animal before. Everything else I had met on these islands was a body doing a job. This was something the sky had built the way a river builds a canyon, slowly, over 60 years, until the shape of it became the shape of what the sky expected. It did not see me. Sovereigns did not sweep for hatch-rank movement any more than a man swept for the mites in his floorboards. That was in my favor, and it was not enough. Because above me the guild artillery kept walking its pattern down the ridge, and the Growlworm, which had learned in 60 years that flame from above meant leave, was moving down the only column of air that was not currently on fire. The column of air I was in. I did not turn my head. I had not turned my head for anything in 9 weeks. I let pressure thread do the work, and pressure thread did what pressure thread did, which was to draw the shape of what had just made the sound into the space behind my eyes as a set of vectors and weights. A net team guild standard steel wing harnesses, a pair anchored to a lower ledge by cable, another pair mobile on the ledge itself, a weighted net already thrown. A second, wound on a shoulder launcher being cranked to firing tension by the ratchet I had just heard. And under the net, breathing hard through a crushed feather tract, one wing folded wrong beneath the weights, was Austin Drave. They had taken him at the transition. Old hawks banked wide at the corner of the third spire because the thermal there fell away in a way the young ones did not respect. Drave banked wide the way he'd banked wide for 11 years, and the guild had put a net team on the shelf below the corner and thrown into the arc of his turn. 3 weeks earlier, I had watched him adjust his hunting arc into my movement corridor, and I had let him, noted it, and let him. He had not adjusted this arc. It was too old. The bird was still alive. His off-wing was folded under the weight in a way that would take a surgeon to unfold, and his working eye had rolled toward the ratchet and was tracking it. He knew what was being cranked. He knew what came after cranking. He had killed things with launchers of his own kind for 11 years, and he understood exactly the arithmetic of the next 30 seconds. I understood it too, and I did not owe him anything, so I sat still and I let pressure thread keep drawing. 3 converging pressure fields, Sovereign above, net team east. Scanner team climbing a service cable up the 4th spire below me and sweeping a thermal scanner in slow arcs across the face I was pressed against. Cascade risk on my running suppression stack sat at a level I had not held for more than 40 seconds without paying for it. I had a narrow margin of safe layered suppression, and less than that before the launcher fired, and after the launcher fired the Sovereign was still coming, one body, the ledger to run. Austin Drave was a Talon rank predator I had used as cover for 6 weeks. I had eliminated a rival for him without permission and without payment, and I had understood the transaction fully at the time. He had banked away from my sleeping ledge with a wing beat that could have taken my spine out through my throat, and he had not taken it. Because in the arithmetic of an old predator's day I was more useful invisible than dead. That was the trade. The trade did not extend to a shoulder launcher on a lower ledge. The trade did not extend to me. If Drave died in the next minute, my movement corridor lost its apex cover, and the guild took home a kill they would celebrate in the mess, and none of it was my problem. That was the correct read. That was the ledger a scout kept. A scout who had let quiet become a doctrine did not spend it on a bird. I noted the correct read. I had already begun to move. Chapter 9. Apex red. The launcher swung. I was already moving before I had decided to move, which is the kind of sentence a soldier learns to distrust and a scout learns to survive by. The gunner's shoulder rotated a degree east. The barrel followed. Drave's exposed flank was the length of a man from the muzzle and closing. I had crossed 9 meters of open granite, and I was still 4 short. The system opened without warning, not a menu, not an offer. An accounting, delivered mid-stride into the meat of the moment. Silver text unfolding across the inside of an eye I had not yet learned to close against it. Threshold met under duress. The world came apart and came back together wider. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next, because the ordinary words are wrong. I did not see more. Seeing is a small verb for what the trait did. I held the pressure field of every moving body inside 140 meters of granite at the same time, in the same instant, without choosing which to attend to. The launcher gunner's pulse climbing, Drave under the net, pulse dropping, an old hawk pacing his own last breath, ledges up and west, a knot of men in staggered cover. Ledges down and east, a signal runner working a mirror. Above me on a granite shelf I had not mapped, a wide, slow shape whose weight I could feel through the rock, the growlworm, low, drawn by the disturbance the way a shark is drawn to a struggling swimmer. And on the survey platform out in dead air, a heartbeat I had noted before and was now cataloging without permission. Mira Calland bent over a chart, reading a topographic anomaly that was me. 30 seconds. I did the arithmetic without writing it down. The trait was giving me every piece of the board. It was not giving me time. A scout knows the difference. You cannot solve 4 problems in half a minute. You can solve one problem well and let the others arrange themselves around the solution. The growlworm was not solvable. It was a sovereign. You did not solve sovereigns. You were not seen by them. The strike team above was not solvable. 6 men, staggered, disciplined. Any move against them lit me up for the long glasses and the mirror runner both. Mira was not a problem. Mira was a cost I had already decided to carry. The launcher gunner was solvable. I had 11 seconds of window before he fired. Apex read did not just widen the field. It resolved detail. I could see the buckle on his harness, brass standard guild issue, the tongue seated a quarter turn short of full lock because he had rigged in a hurry when the descent order came. The strap took his weight at a downward angle off the anchor bolt. The bolt was sound, the buckle was not. There was a hairline stress fracture along the pin housing, the kind of flaw a quartermaster inspects for and a field soldier never has time to check. In a fair world, he would have reported it and drawn a new one. This was not a fair world. It was the Sky Islands under a culling guild operation, and men rigging in a hurry got what they got. 1 second. I looked at the number and did not like it. A full second was a long time to be a silver body against dark stone with long glasses on the cloud line. I had built weeks of doctrine on never being seen for any fraction of a second by anyone. The doctrine was how I ate. Drave shifted under the net. His pulse dropped. The gunner's shoulder came another degree east. I chose the second. I moved from the shadow of the overhang onto the open granite, and I struck the buckle from 9 meters out, not the man, not the launcher. The buckle, a thin needle of concentrated pressure along the fracture line, the way you break a bone by asking it to fail, where it was already failing. The pin sheared, the strap released, the gunner's weight went where weight goes when nothing is holding it, down and out, past the ledge, into open air with the launcher still in his hands. He did not scream. There was not time for the scream to organize itself into sound. His partner on the anchor line lunged and missed by the width of a glove. The net went slack on the corner where the gunner's counterweight had held it taut. Drave found the slack the way a wounded predator finds anything that will let him live. Instantly, without thought, and with the last strength he had, his good wing punched through the opening. The bad one dragged. He was airborne on 1.5 wings, and the wind off the north face caught him, and the wind was kinder to him than the guild had been. He fell sideways into the thermal seam I had mapped weeks ago on this ledge system. The seam held him. He rode it out west, low and ugly and alive, and the cloud took him. I was on open granite for 1 4/10 of a second. I know the number because Apex Reed gave it to me. It counted the interval the way an instrument counts. I had committed to 1. I had used 4/10 more than I meant to, because fault strike required a follow-through I had not accounted for. The pressure needle did not release cleanly until the buckle had finished failing. And finishing took time that the specifications had not mentioned. 4/10 of a second is nothing. It is the interval between a heartbeat and the next one. On a long glass, it is enough. I could feel him through the trait. I could feel the small adjustment of his shoulder as the glass came around, and the moment his breath changed. He had been breathing at the tempo of a man on a long, tedious search. His breath went out once, sharply, and did not come back in for the count of 2. He had me. Silver against dark granite, small, wrong-shaped for anything in his species catalog. Moving with the specific economy of something that had chosen to move. No panic, no flight arc, no fear signature at all. A creature holding still on a ledge where a launcher had just failed, in the moment after it had failed, in a way that made the failure and the creature into one sentence. I felt the sentence arrive in his head. I felt him revise the operation around it. He had come to the spires to clear an ecosystem, pest control at industrial scale, a commercial contract with a scheduled completion date and a bonus tied to volume. He had put ships in the air and men under harness because that many men could kill what was there efficiently. He had been thinking about tonnage. He stopped thinking about tonnage. The trait was at 19 seconds, and the count did not stop. I could feel Cascade gathering at the edge of the field, the way a storm gathers pressure before it commits to a direction. I slid off the open granite into the crack behind the overhang, and null trace folded back over me, and the trait dropped its window down to observation only, and the count kept going. 22 seconds. Sork lowered the long glass, raised it again, and swept the ledge where I had been. He found nothing, which was the correct answer for the ledge. I was 6 meters east and 2 meters lower and inside stone. He knew it was the correct answer for the ledge and the wrong answer for the operation. He did not raise the alarm. He did not order fire. He turned to the signal officer at his elbow and said something I could not hear through pressure thread at that distance, and the signal officer's pulse jumped, and a mirror on the forward deck began to move. A pattern I had not seen him call before. I catalogued the flashes. I would decode them later, if I lived to later. 28 seconds. I closed the trait manually. The system let me, which was a courtesy I had not expected, and the world contracted back down to what a Duskwing Sliver was built to hold. It was like a door closing on a hall of instruments. The silence on the other side was enormous. Drave's cry came up the seam a minute later, a single ugly note, more triumph than a bird his age should have had left in him. He was somewhere out west, alive, ugly, and he would live the night. It was the first sound in weeks that had reached me and not required a response. I did not respond to it now. I set my face against the stone, and I ran the math on the 4/10. I had shown myself for 1 4/10 of a second. He had needed only 1 2/10. It was the smallest miscalculation I had made since I was a man. It was going to cost me everything I had left. Chapter 10, 4 seconds. The eye that turned toward me was the size of a shield. I remember thinking that specifically in those words, because a shield was a thing I had known once with my hands, and I needed a measurement I could hold. The grail worm did not descend the way a bird descends. It sank. 60 years of muscle and cartilage, lowering itself through cold air on wings that did not have to beat because the sky was already inclined to hold them. The pressure changed around me before the shape did. I felt the air get heavier by ounces, then by pounds, then by the weight of the mountain behind me pressing forward through the stone at my back. I had 4 seconds. I did not know that yet. I would know it later, when I had the leisure to count what my body did without asking me. I layered the traits in the order I rehearsed on the ridgeline, when rehearsal was a thing I could still afford. Void breath first, lungs slowing to the count I learned from the corpse of a soldier on the fog shelf, whose ribs told me how a body held still when it was pretending not to be a body. Echo skin second, the small silver plates along my flank cooling to the temperature of the stone behind me, matching the granite's red within a degree. Null trace third, the ambient wake my movement should have left in the air, simply not there, folded back into the current, as if the air had never been disturbed. 3 suppressions layered. The system window opened at the corner of my vision without being asked. I read it. I did not answer it. There was nothing to answer. The first second was a religious thing. I was raised in a garrison town where the temple bell rang at dawn and dusk, and I never once, in 23 years of hearing it, thought of the sound as sacred. Now I understood what the priests were trying to say. Something that had been alive when my grandfather was a boy was looking directly at the rock where I lay, and the rock was reporting back to it in the language of stone, and my body was inside the report and not inside it. The eye held, the pupil, a vertical slit as long as my whole body tightened by a fraction. I felt that fraction as a change in the pressure of the air against my flank. The second was arithmetic. My lungs had 2 more cycles in them before void breath forced a compensatory intake I would not be able to control. My plates were holding the stone reed, but the temperature differential at my belly, where I was pressed hardest, was climbing. Null trace stayed clean. The trait was clean. The body carrying it was the failure point, and the body was mine. I did not move. Movement was the one thing I could not afford, and so it was the one thing my body wanted to do. The small animal, evolved thing under the intelligence I had carried with me from the fall was screaming at me to run, and the intelligence was holding it down with both hands. The 3rd second was the one I would remember afterwards, when I remembered any of it. The sovereign flinched. The flinch was a stilling, a 2-degree adjustment in the angle of the head, a rebalancing of the enormous neck against the wind, and a decision made somewhere behind the eye that whatever was on this rock was either not there at all, or was there in a way the predator's long career had not equipped it to name. 60 years is a long time to be the thing that decides. It is also long enough to have learned that some decisions are made by not deciding. The grailworm chose not to decide. Its head lifted a hand's breadth. The eye rotated away from the granite by degrees 5, 10, 15, and settled on the middle distance where the guild's running lights were arranging themselves against the cloud. The 4th second was the one that let me live. The wings adjusted. The pressure lifted. The mountain at my back stopped pressing forward through my ribs. The sovereign sank away from my ledge on a slow inclined line, aimed now at the airships that had made themselves visible in a way I had not, and I was still on the granite. And the granite was still on the mountain, and I was still alive. 2 seconds later, Cascade hit. 90 seconds of nothing does not sound like anything. That is the definition, and it is also the whole of what I can tell you about it. My eyes were open. I know they were open because when the world came back, my lids were dry and the cold had cracked the film at the corners, but I did not see. My ears were operational, the small canals uninjured, the drums intact, but I did not hear. The pressure thread along my flank that read the wind's grain was live, but I did not feel it. Every sense I had was on and reporting to a place in my skull that had gone dark, because the traffic had exceeded the road. I hung by claw to a stone I could not perceive. The one thing my body knew, without needing me to tell it, was how to grip. The talons on my forelimbs locked into a hairline seam in the granite in the last conscious motion I ordered before the sovereign's eye turned, and they held. They held while the world was gone. If my grip had opened by the width of a hair, I would have fallen the full drop onto the ledges below in perfect sensory silence, and I would have died without ever knowing which direction the ground had been. I counted. I counted because it was the only thing I could still do that belonged to me. The count did not restore the world. It only proved I was still inside a mind that could produce a count. The wind was doing something to my flank. I inferred this from the small rocking my body was doing against the seam. Not because I felt it, and I adjusted my weight without knowing whether the adjustment was correct. Somewhere near the end of the count, the numbers stopped being numbers and became the shape of a rope I was climbing hand over hand back toward the surface of the air. The senses folded back on line in the order they had left. Pressure thread first, the wind resolving into grain along my ribs like a hand laid on my side. Hearing second, the spires reassembling around me in a wash of high, thin cliff wind, and the far low complaint of stone settling somewhere below. Sight last and worst because the stars came back all at once and my pupils were not ready for them, and for a full second I was blind again in the opposite direction. I was alive. The sovereign was gone. The sky above my ledge was empty of anything larger than a bat, and the constellation the grelare-worm's shape had covered was visible again. And I had 4 seconds of a 60-year predator's attention on my back that would never leave me. The first thing I heard, when my hearing came back the rest of the way, was 3 ledges below me. Elimination pattern 7, full perimeter, silver target, crest rank, confirmed sighting. No one goes home until it is on a hook. That voice ordered my death once already. I recognized the cadence before I recognized the words, the same measured, careful, professional cadence a man used when he was arranging a thing he intended to see through. The sovereign looked at the rock where I was not and chose not to know. Sork looked through a long glass for 1 2/10 of a second and chose the opposite. He chose to know. He chose to name. And a thing that is named is a thing that can be hunted. I lay flat on the granite and listened to the horn call the pattern into place around me, and I did not move. And I understood that the ledge I was on had just stopped being a hiding place and started being an address. Chapter 11. The Wrong Channel. The channel below me was the only way out of the pocket Sork had drawn a circle around. I had known that for 6 minutes. He had known it, I suspected, for longer. The spires funneled everything my size and rank toward that seam. If I had been him, I would have set a net team on the lip of it and a crossbow line 30 meters inside it and a signal lantern at the mouth to call the kill. He had done all 3. I could read the platforms from where I hung. I was going to die in that seam. That was the arithmetic. Second team, hold at ledge 4, confirm sightline on the throat. Confirmed, sir. Throat is, sir. The throat closes off at 40 meters. This isn't the exit channel. What? Repeat, this is a dead fissure. The channel diverges west. I did not move. I did not permit myself to move. I hung from the underside of a granite fin 200 meters above them and watched 16 armored men slide into a hole that led nowhere. And I ran the arithmetic again because arithmetic was what I had left. Sork did not make that error. Sork had come up through the forward line the same way I had, and men who came up that way did not misread maps. Someone had given him the wrong seam. Ma'am, Commander wants a re-vector. Strike lead says the throat closes at 40. He's asking which crevasse. A beat, tell him the west seam is unconfirmed. I don't have a clean read on the drift margin. Ma'am, the map has the west seam on it. The map has a projection. I haven't ground-truthed it. Tell him unconfirmed. Yes, ma'am. I could not hear her yet. I only knew the strike teams had gone into the wrong hole, and that Sork's voice on the signal horn had gone from certainty to something narrower. He was recalling them. He was going to send them into the west seam next. He had 30 seconds to decide, and I had 30 seconds to be gone. I moved. The fracture had been on my map for 11 days. It had not been on hers. I had spent an afternoon inside it once, on the theory that any seam I could fit through was a seam worth knowing. That afternoon paid the whole debt of my new body in one transaction. Pressure thread was a scout's instrument. It read heartbeats the way a good ear read footfalls. I threw it wide to place the second team's re-vector, and I caught off to the north-northwest at the range of the flagship's survey platform. A single human heart running at 130 beats a minute against a resting body. I knew that rhythm. I had carried it once in a body that could still sweat, the night before I walked the ledger to the command post. The night before Sork's bolt found the space between my shoulder blades. 130 beats against a resting body was the rhythm of a person who has decided something they have not yet done. She had rerouted them. Returning, ma'am. Commander wants to know how unconfirmed. He wants a percent. 60. 60% unconfirmed, ma'am. 60% confidence the west seam is the exit. 40% margin. That's my read. A pause, ma'am. Yesterday you had it at 92. Yesterday I hadn't looked at it in this light. I understood the shape of what she had done from 6 kilometers off. She had reported a margin of professional doubt to a commander who had overruled her formal objection about the crevasse drift 12 hours earlier, and this time she had put the margin at 60% instead of 92. The margin was the size of my body plus the seam I was in. The margin was chosen. She had chosen it without letting the choice become a sentence in her own head. I did not slow down. I threaded the fracture, cleared the seam's throat by 100 meters of hard stone, and put a ridge between myself and the strike teams before Sork's signal horn called them back to the west. I did not owe her anything. I noted that I did not owe her anything. I noted that I had noted it, and the noting was itself a kind of ledger, and the ledger was the sort of thing a scout kept because a scout who did not keep ledgers died surprised. I banked north. The lantern on her chart deck stayed lit. The signal horn below carried Sork's voice through the pocket. He was moving the teams to the west seam. He was late by the width of one cartographer's margin, and I had crossed the ridge in the time that margin bought. The correct move was north and up and into the thermal channels the pinnacle drifters had not colonized. The correct move was to be gone before the second team cleared the throat. I held the thermal for 11 seconds longer than doctrine allowed. She was looking for me. She was looking for the shape her margin had bought, because a cartographer who buys a margin needs to know what the margin was for. She had not permitted herself to ask the question in words. She had permitted herself only to look at the wrong angle in the direction of the wrong gulf at the wrong hour of the morning, and to keep her lantern lit. I turned away. I was already turning away when she looked up. That was the arithmetic I permitted myself. She had bought me a margin. I had held the thermal a handful of seconds against it. I had paid the interest in silence, and I was gone before she knew there had been a transaction. The signal horn behind me called the teams into the west seam, where they would find nothing. Sork would know by the time the second team cleared the throat that his cartographer had put a margin on a map that had not carried one the day before. He was a man who read ledgers. He would find the 60 in the log next to the 92, and he would draw the correct conclusion from the wrong evidence. He would decide she had made an honest error. He was going to be wrong about that. Chapter 12. The Report. I had learned the flash code the way a man learns a second language he does not intend to speak. Long, short, long was a coordinate. 2 shorts and a hold was a countersign. I read the lanterns. The flagship was talking to command. Command was 2 islands east, past the clearway, on a stone platform I had never seen and would not see. The flagship spoke in the polite cadence of an officer who knew his message would be read by 3 admirals and a treasury clerk. I translated as it went. Anomaly confirmed. Crest rank, species designation pending, behavioral profile inconsistent with baseline, requesting dedicated elimination operation. I held still under a shelf of black stone and watched the lantern shutter open and close and open, and I did the arithmetic a scout does when he sees a message he was not meant to see. A dedicated elimination operation was a thing the guild had run 4 times in its recorded history, and every one of the 4 had been for a sovereign. Not a crest rank. They were going to vote in summer. The lantern held on a long flash and then rolled through the requisition string. Airships on station, more from the Western Fleet, artillery and gas dispersal doubled, net teams tripled, a specialist wing pulled from garrison duty at the capital and reassigned. The reassignment order alone would have taken a colonel a week to write, and the colonel had written it in an afternoon. I could tell by the cadence of the flash. It was hurried in the way requisitions get hurried when the man requesting them is afraid. Sork was afraid of me. I did not permit myself to enjoy it. Enjoying it was the beginning of the mistake. I noted the fear the way I would note a wind shift over a ridgeline, a fact, not a feeling. A frightened commander made frightened decisions, and frightened decisions were louder than calm ones, and louder decisions were easier to read from a ledge 200 meters up. The flagship's lantern went dark for the acknowledgement pause. Command was thinking. Command took 11 seconds to think, which for the guild was fast. Then the eastern platform answered, approved, authorized, priority tier 1, funding released against the current quarter. A name at the bottom of the string I did not recognize in the position an admiral's name would sit, a new admiral. The rotation had happened 3 weeks ago and I had not been told, because I was a monster on a rock and no one told monsters anything. The flagship acknowledged. The lantern shuttered its close pattern. The message was over. I did not move for another quarter hour, then I moved. I could not hear her from where I was, but I could see the shape of her through the platform's canvas wall, the way a scout sees a man through a tent, by the movement of the lantern's shadow. She had not slept the night before either. I had watched her lantern burn from midnight to the gray hour both nights, and both nights she had walked the deck and stood at the port rail and looked at the spires without seeing me. Tonight, she was doing something at the chart table that made her lantern jump twice in the same minute, which meant she had found something she did not like. What she had found was in the sky. I had seen it from the ledge before the lantern code started. 2 of the small islands north of the clearway had shifted, not the slow drift of the season, but a real shift. 10 meters east in a night, and then more in the following watch. The crevasse cluster the guild artillery had broken open the better part of 2 months ago had been holding those islands in a balance older than the guild's charter, and the balance was gone, and the islands were moving toward the airship lane. Mira had filed the objection 6 weeks ago. She'd put her name on it, put the projected date on it, spring of next year, 6 months out, and the projected vector, and signed it and filed it, and Sork had not read it. Because Sork did not read objections from cartographers, because cartographers did not vote on the Treasury Board. The sky was reading it for him now, 4 months early. To herself low, measuring with dividers, 10 meters, 12. That can't be right. Let me measure it again. Quieter, that's not right either. She stood at the chart table a long time. I watched her shadow. She did none of the things a cartographer does when she finds a fleet hazard drifting into a shipping lane, because she had done all of those things 6 weeks ago and had watched them go into a drawer. She sat down, she uncorked a bottle of ink. She wrote something on a small piece of paper, folded it twice, and did not put it in the record book. She put it in her coat pocket. I could not read the paper from where I was, and I did not need to. I had watched 3 lieutenants and 1 captain do exactly what she had just done, write down a thing they were not permitted to say, carry it in a pocket, and wait for the man they were not permitted to accuse to make one more mistake. The paper was a receipt. She was starting a ledger. I had walked to a command post once with a ledger under my arm. I knew where that walk ended. The operation was not precise. It was profitable. The guild had broken open a crevasse cluster ahead of any responsible timeline because breaking it open cleared a salvage lane worth 3 seasons of contract revenue. The salvage lane had been worth the crevasse. The crevasse had been worth 2 islands. The 2 islands were going to be worth an airship, and after the airship a village on the ground below, and after the village the reputation of a commander who had already stopped thinking of the sky as a place and had started thinking of it as a column in a ledger. The elimination operation being staffed against me was not the correction of a mistake, it was the concealment of one. If they killed the ghost on the spires, the anomaly report went into a drawer next to Mira's objection, and the drifting islands became an unrelated weather event. And the salvage lanes stayed profitable, and the admiral in the capital signed the year-end account without a frown. I was a line item they needed to close. The elimination order came down on the fleet channel at the 3rd bell of the middle watch. I read it as it went. Priority Tier 1. Target designation issued. All wings acknowledge. Then the designation, 3 flashes, held, 2 flashes, held a roll. The system window opened in my vision before the lantern finished the 2nd flash, the way it sometimes did when a name I had not yet earned settled into place, silver, terse, without ceremony. The lantern rolled the same designation across the water in the guild's code, Ghost of the Spires. 3 words in a language a man had written into a book before I enlisted, and now they were the name of the thing that had been a corporal and was something else. I had not heard them spoken aloud. I would, in time. Sork would say them first, to a room of officers pulled from garrison duty who did not yet know why, and one of them would write the name in a requisition, and the requisition would move through a treasury board that did not vote in summer and was going to vote in summer. And the name would become a line the guild had to close before the year-end account. I watched the lantern shudder through the rest of the string and go dark. Below, on the survey platform, Mira's lantern was still burning. She had not seen the signal. She sat at the chart table with a folded paper in her coat pocket and 2 islands drifting on her instruments ahead of a schedule she had signed her name to. She did not know she had a name now, on a ledger she had not yet opened. Neither did I, quite, though the system had just given me one. I turned my head once, slowly, and looked north, where the Grailworm's ridge held the horizon down against the stars, and I looked south, where 6 sets of running lights arranged themselves in a pattern I had already decoded, and I understood that a thing had been set in motion tonight that could not be called back by any lantern. Chapter 13. The Highest Stone. The last ledge was a hand's span of stone that ran out into nothing. I set one claw on it and waited, the way I had learned to wait, until the wind that lived on this face admitted I was there. It took 41 seconds. I counted them because counting was the shape my thinking had taken since the bolt, and because a body that does not yet know its own weight learns the weight of a ledge by the interval it needs to trust it. Then I went up. The stone at the top was flat as a table and no wider than a shield. It was cold in a specific way, the cold of a place the sun found last and left first, a cold that did not belong to the season, but to the altitude. I settled on it. I let my chest go down to the granite. I let the wind sort itself around me. Below, the spires fell away in named stages I had climbed by name, volthide ledges, drifter seams, the clearway a pale thread against the fog shelf. Above there was nothing at all between me and the stars except a sovereign that no longer knew I existed and a great many miles of cold air that did. The system window opened without my asking it to. I read it twice. I had learned to read system text the way I had learned to read Sork's dispatches, which is to say slowly and with attention to what it had refused to say. This one refused a great deal. No path offered, no kill listed, no trait name to acquire. It did not tell me what the requirement was, and I understood in the small, steady way I now understood most things, that this was because the requirement was not a thing the interface could describe. The interface had at last come to the edge of what could be quantified in me, and had done the honest thing and stopped. Earned, not given. I had heard that phrase once, in a barracks, from a sergeant who lost 3 fingers to a training saber because he would not step back from a bind he was losing. He had said it about rank and meant it about pain, and been wrong about both, but the interface which did not know him was right. I lifted my head and found the Grailworm. It was 3 ridges east and higher than any ridge should be, a shape hung against the constellation the old maps called the Ferryman. It was not hunting. It was drifting on a thermal I could not have found without Apex Read, and I did not turn Apex Read on, because I did not need to see it more clearly than I already saw it. A body wide enough to eclipse a constellation, moving because the air moved. It did not know I was here. It did not know I had watched it flinch. It would not, in the ordinary run of a sovereign's life, ever know either thing. This was correct. This was the shape a thing that large should have in a life it shared with a thing my size, and I intended to remain outside its story. Below I found the fleet. 6 ships. The same 6. Sork had not called for more because Sork had not yet learned to ask for what he could not requisition on his own signature. That would come. The dedicated elimination order was on his desk and staffed and approved, and the fleet was doing what a fleet does when its commander has begun to sleep poorly, moving without being told to, in the way a horse begins to shift its weight before a rider has decided to mount. I watched the running lights find their spacing. Green forward, red aft, white amidships, the interval between the lead ship and the second holding steady at what an old ledger clerk would have called a safe cruising gap. It was a good interval. It said the helmsman was careful and the wind was steady, and the commander had not yet issued the order that would compress the line into a search pattern. It said I had time. I did not descend. I want to be exact about this, because the choice was the whole of the chapter and the whole of what the interface had refused to name. I had on that stone 3 things I had not had before: The height, the read, and a crest-rank body that could have crossed the intervening air in under 9 minutes and struck the lead ship's bridge before the second ship's watch understood what its lead had lost. I had, in fault strike and void breath and the layered suppression that had made a sovereign flinch, the tools to open Sork's cabin door from the outside without ever being seen doing it. I had in the memory of a bolt in my back and a long fall through cold air. The reason I did not descend, nor did I hate him. I want to be exact about that too, because I had expected to, and had prepared to, and had, in the first week of the fog shelf, rehearsed the sentences I would say to him if the interface ever gave me a mouth again. The sentences were still there. I could feel their shape, the way I could feel the shape of the ledger copy I had been carrying to the command post the afternoon he killed me. But hate was a posture, and posture cost seconds, and seconds were the currency I had been paid in since I stopped being a man. I could not afford to spend them on Sork. He would spend his own, in his own time, on the operation his cabin lamp was still lit for. The sky was patient about these things. I would learn to be patient in the sky's way because I lived in the sky now, and the sky's way was the only way that worked here. What I would do instead was wait correctly. On this stone, or on a stone like it, or on a series of stones the map did not yet have names for. Until the requirement the interface had refused to name found me the way requirements find soldiers who have learned to stand at a post no one is watching, earned, not given. I understood the phrase now in a way the sergeant had not. It was the interval between the moment the work was done and the moment the work was recognized, standing in that interval without flinching for as long as the interval lasted, which in my case might be a season or a year or the whole remaining life of a guild that had scheduled my elimination on a form. I could stand there, I found, on the highest stone I had ever occupied that I could. I began to count the seconds between the lead ship's forward light and the second ship's forward light. I counted, and the second light passed the reference point I had chosen, a chip in the granite a hand's width from my left forelimb. I counted again, and the third light passed. The count held. The interval was steady, and I was steady inside it, and for the first time since the bolt I noticed that being steady was not a thing I was doing, it was a thing I had become. Below me on a survey platform I could not see from this angle, a compass I had never touched, spun once for a reason no instrument the guild carried would ever measure, and stopped. I counted again, the fourth light passed, the interval held. Chapter 14. The Compass. Dawn came up over the fleet the way it came up over any working camp, without ceremony, without apology, gray on gray. And the running lights along the hulls stayed lit because nobody on watch had thought to kill them. That was the first thing I noticed from the ledge. The lights were still on an hour after they should have been off. Discipline had slipped by one small increment, not with a crime, with a lamp. His cabin lamp was still lit. I could see it from where I was, a small square of oil light against the black of the hull, steady, unmoving. He had been at the desk all night. I knew the posture without seeing him. I had carried reports to men in that posture for 4 years. The report on his desk had my name on it now. The system had assigned the name 3 days back, and I had not spoken it aloud, and I did not need to. Sork had spoken it, written it down, and signed under it in the same hour. Approved full pattern. 6 ships, dedicated, kill order standing. He said it once to nobody at the desk, in the tone a man uses when he is trying to make a decision sound like it has already been made. Then he capped the pen. Then he did not sleep. 200 meters aft of him, on the survey platform, Mira Calland was already up. She had not slept either. She never did well the night after Sork overruled her, and she had been overruled twice this week. And she was working through it the way she worked through everything, with the instruments in front of her and a pencil in her hand, and the map of the Crown Rock spires spread flat and weighted at the corners with lead shot. The compass was between her hands. She was not looking at it. She was looking at the crevasse cluster she had filed the structural objection on, the one Sork had ordered destroyed, the one now drifting toward the airship lane 6 weeks ahead of her projection. Her objection had gone into a record no one would open. The sky had confirmed it for her anyway, on its own schedule, without her permission. The compass needle moved. It turned once, all the way around, then it stopped, exactly where it had started, as if it had never moved. No Ferris body sat on the platform, no magnetic storm showed in the log, and none of the 3 instruments she trusted registered a thing. She sat very still. Her eye went from the compass to the crevasse cluster on her map, and then, at last, up. She looked up at the wrong angle to see me. She always did. That was the thing I had noticed about her from the first. She looked correctly at everything except the place I actually was. She was reading the sky in the way a cartographer reads it, which is to say she was reading the shape it should have, and I was in the shape it should not have. And her eye slid past me the way water slides past stone. I was counting. The running lights on the fleet flashed at intervals. Bow midships, stern bow midships, stern, a rhythm set by a chief signalman I had known by name in another life. The rhythm was slow. Slower than it should have been, a tenth of a second slow, maybe two. On a well-run fleet, that number was 0. On Sork's fleet, the night after he approved a dedicated elimination against a target he had seen for a heartbeat through a long glass, the number was climbing. He was tired, his signalmen were tired, his watch officers were tired, the lamp in his cabin was still lit at dawn. I had been tired too, once. I had been tired the whole month before he put a bolt in my back. I remembered what tired had cost me. I was going to let it cost him the same way, not in one blow, not in a single spectacular reckoning, but in tenths of a second, accumulating, until the interval got wide enough for a silver body to walk through. Mira set her pencil down. She did not touch the compass. She had the good sense, the professional sense, not to disturb an instrument that had done something it should not have done, in case whatever had moved it again. She waited, and she watched, and she made no note in the log yet. She was the only person on this fleet who understood that some readings were worth keeping to yourself until you knew what they meant. I noted the correct read and moved on. Sork came up on deck at the changing of the watch and did not put the lamp out behind him. He stood at the rail with his hands on the wood and looked north toward the spires, toward the ledges he had ordered swept and the channels he had ordered netted and the operation he had staffed and approved and signed. He was looking for me. He was looking with the naked eye in the wrong light, at the wrong angle, from the wrong altitude, and he could not have found me if I had been standing on his shoulder. He looked anyway. That was the shape of the man. He looked, and he did not find, and he did not adjust the way he looked. He would send the ships instead. The ships would come. The ships would come soon. I had counted the intervals, and I had counted the fuel lighter runs, and I had counted the crew rotations on the moorings bar, and I knew, to within a day, when the elimination pattern would launch. I had that day, and the day before it, and the night between them. Below me on the platform, Mira picked the compass up at last, very carefully, and held it flat on her palm. The needle stayed north. She turned her palm one full, slow rotation, the way you test an instrument you no longer trust, and the needle held true through every degree of it. She set it back on the chart, wrote something in her log, and left the entry unsigned. I did not know what she wrote. I did not need to. Some things a man learns to read from posture, from the angle of a shoulder, from the pressure of a pencil on paper he cannot see. She had noted that the compass had moved with no cause on record, and the time of it, and she had left the name of the anomaly blank. Because a good cartographer does not name a thing before she is sure what it is. She would have a name for me eventually. I was not in a hurry for her to have it. They had built a career on eliminating things they had never bothered to understand. I was going to be patient about it. I had all the time the sky had, and the sky had a great deal of time. If you want to know what I did with it, stay close. I am not finished counting.